City Council, which is in Melbourne's west. As you might have just heard, she returned home 2 days ago after 2 months in the United Kingdom, the United States and Canada, undertaking a Churchill Fellowship to investigate how councils can respond to rough sleeping while balancing responsibilities to the wider community. As part of this trip, she visited a selection of public libraries on the east and west coasts of the USA that are running social work programs. Her aim through the fellowship is to build a new body of knowledge for councils, developing guidelines that can be put to practical use in Australia and shared with colleagues and collaborators around the world. The title of Leanne's presentation is Can Libraries End Homelessness? Stories and Reflections from a Churchill Fellowship. So we're just going to start the recording. I think Monique, you might, you've already done that. So yeah, we are recording this, and as with all the other sessions, the recording to this will be made available to you through the symposium website. And if you have questions, please pop them in the Q&A link on the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those at the end of Leanne's presentation. Thank you very much. So I'll hand over to you, Leanne.
Thanks, Jane. Great to be here. I'm just going to share my screen to see if that works, hopefully. So I'd like to, are we all good?
Yep.
Great. Okay, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on where I live here in Melbourne, the Wurundjeri people, and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. So thanks so much, everyone, for the opportunity to join you today. And I realise that I'm the last person on a long and interesting agenda. So I really hope I can keep your attention at this late stage with a rather casual conversation, a few stories and some time for questions and discussion. So first up, let me come clean. I'm not a librarian and I'm not a social worker. As Jane mentioned in the introduction, I came into this world of libraries and social work through a couple of roles I held with my former employers at the City of Melbourne, first working in the homelessness team and then in libraries. And you've already heard from a few of my wonderful colleagues on this journey. We're a mutual admiration society, I think, including Anne-Marie Faber and Anna Lockwood. So I'm not going to repeat that story now either. But there are a few articles out there about what we did in Melbourne, and I'm sure we could share them around if anyone was interested. But I will say the light bulb moment for us that led us to the inception of the Library Social Work program was realising that a number of the people that the City of Melbourne's homelessness team was supporting through street outreach were the same as those who our library staff were assisting or sometimes finding a little challenging in their branches. And when we joined the dots, which is not always a first response in busy local government settings, we were able to initiate a piece of joint work that allowed us to better understand the situation we faced and later employ a permanent social worker in the library. And I think the outcomes were amazing. One of the people who helped us tremendously, as Anne-Marie mentioned, on this journey was Leanne Esquera, and she's San Francisco's and probably the world's first library social worker. I'm not really sure about that. But last week, I had the most amazing opportunity to visit Leah and some members of her team at the main branch of the public library. And as Jane mentioned, actually, I just got home 2 days ago after 9 weeks on the road to the US, the UK and Canada, and I was completing a Churchill Fellowship investigating how local government can best respond to rough sleeping while balancing responsibilities to the wider community. The Churchill Fellowship allowed me to take a wide look at homelessness response in local government, and it's an area where a lot of expectation tends to sit from the public's perspective, but relatively little attention has been paid in Australia in understanding the roles, responsibilities and outcomes in this space. And you can see on this slide some of the amazing and generous people I met up with along the way. They work in all levels of government, at not-for-profits, for peak bodies and in the media. And as they are often an arm of local government, I included visits to public libraries at 4 North American locations: New York, Baltimore, Washington, DC, and San Francisco. And as part of this investigation, I asked all of my contacts about the roles local government can play in homelessness prevention and response, and found while there may be a tendency in some places to only view the people with homelessness in their job title or position description as the ones with the capability to make a difference, there are also many great initiatives, partnerships, and approaches in place that we can learn from. So can libraries end homelessness? Well, of course, the answer to that question is not straightforward. And I have to admit that I gave Jane this title for my presentation before I had actually conducted many of the interviews that form what I'll tell you about today. In many places I visited, especially in the big cities in North America, it felt like there may never be an end to homelessness. But I definitely saw that an important key in reducing and hopefully ending it is through partnerships. Genuine and equal partnerships between communities, specialist services, and all levels of government. And when we think about what local government can do, then I think it's really clear that councils have a huge opportunity to put their many hats on in this space and really make a difference. And public libraries, often as an important arm of local government, are extremely well positioned as free, welcoming public spaces, locations of learning, information management, and community connection. And they can play a part in those collaborative efforts to reduce or end homelessness. But whether that role is acknowledged by others working in government homelessness response remains, in my opinion, up in the air. I think there are actions libraries can take to build wider understanding regarding the role that they can play, to show the benefits of collaboration through libraries and the opportunities that libraries offer to connect with communities. And with that in mind, today I'm going to draw on what I learned through a number of initiatives with interviews with library workers and others during my Churchill Fellowship, and discuss 5 key insights about how libraries can best respond to and contribute towards ending or reducing homelessness in local communities. So having listened to many of the presentations and discussions today, I've heard a number of these points come up already, so this might serve as a bit of a roundup. I should also note at this point that these observations are entirely mine. They're influenced by what I've experienced and the people I've spoken to during my Churchill Fellowship and in the time preceding that, mainly in the United States and Australia. It's quite likely that a number of you will have different experiences or thoughts regarding the points I raise. And I really encourage you to join the conversation here and to stay in touch with me afterwards. I'll give you my email at the end, because this is, after all, a learning experience. So let's go. So number 1, and this is something we've already heard a few speakers say today, acknowledge that libraries do have a role in addressing homelessness, and while library staff are not social workers, that they do have a role to play. Now, I know I promised you insights from around the world, but I'm actually going to start in Melbourne. And here is my dear friend and former colleague, Anne-Marie, who you know runs the City of Melbourne Libraries. This is a photo from a story that ran in The Age at the start of our library social work program a few years ago, and it features Craig, who was a long-time library patron. I start with this insight about the role that libraries play because it was something that I only recognised when I moved from a homelessness team into libraries. And as a council worker, I've often reflected on the fact that we're quite good at reaching out into the community to coordinate homelessness response, but often fail to recognise many of the things that our own councils deliver and that might have equal impact in this space. Back then, it was news to me that council staff outside of the homeless team could be valuable allies in helping us understand the strains felt by a community, and that they could be excellent sources for collecting data about local homelessness situations. And as I mentioned in my introduction, the light bulb moment for us was in realising that both the library and homelessness teams at our council were working with many of the same people. In acknowledging that we all had a role in this response, we made a really important first step. But just as important was all of us, library staff and management, defining what role everyone would play. This was our experience in Melbourne, and I heard the same reflection in every other interview I conducted during my Churchill Fellowship. There was a lot of nodding going on at this point. If we agree that responding to the needs of patrons who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness or presenting with other complex needs is within the scope of a library's offering, what is the role that library staff should play? I'm certain that we all agree that librarians are not social workers, but in these times when the scope of what libraries deliver expands, staff do have a role in working with and supporting the diverse needs of customers, and this needs to be clearly articulated. Having a social worker program or people trained or equipped to work with people with complex needs in the library provides great support, but I don't think it means that every single interaction must be referred to the specialist team. A balance needs to be found, and that works best when it's negotiated and agreed, when staff know clearly what's expected of them and know what to do when presented with situations that are out of their immediate knowledge area or comfort zone. Every library I visited ran training for staff in a variety of areas like trauma-informed responses, de-escalation techniques, and drug and alcohol awareness. And they saw it as their responsibility to equip and support their staff. So it's a balance. Successful programs invest time and effort into making sure that library social workers and library staff hold a clear understanding of their roles and responsibilities and understand how they'll work together. They respect what each brings to the picture and how they can complement each other's work. So here's my first reflection. Councils should acknowledge the multiple areas where homelessness might be addressed, with libraries being one of these, and make a commitment to supporting and training staff for the best possible response. Moving on. And now to number 2. Pay attention to your social worker's skill set and do what you can to support their needs. Again, this is one that I've heard a bit today, which was great to hear the discussion. This is Mariel Sass in the picture. She's the social worker at Baltimore's Enoch Pratt Free Library. And she's been there about a year and told me a story about her work with Donald Taylor, who you can also see in the photo, who she helped fulfill a dream, getting a job as a school crossing supervisor. Donald was 82. He didn't know how to apply for the job that was advertised online. Mariel set him up with an email address and helped him complete his job application. She then monitored replies, and every time an update came, she gave him a call. She helped him prepare for his interviews, and when he got hired in August, she helped him complete everything else he needed to do to start his new job. Mariel is one of those people who's privileged to have a name that reflects her personality. She's full of sass. From this time I spent with her, I could see that she had energy and enthusiasm and lots of ideas. She's driven to make a difference and doesn't shy away from what she believes in. We spoke about what it would take to be a successful library social worker, and what she told me reflected attributes I'd seen and observed at other locations as well. She's a people person. She has built good relationships and works closely with many partners internally and externally. She's well organised. She's created processes to provide guidance and standardised ways of working. She's dedicated to training and mentoring. She's been running training for library staff and providing them with one-on-one support as they need it. She would go out to bat. She made the case to pay interns and set up incentives that would encourage them to stay on outside of term dates. And she's not shy in approaching customers and tailoring her work to meet their needs. Mariel described herself as a generalist with a vision. She also said that a major contributor to her success was the support that she got from her manager, who has experience and clout and supports her by opening doors and providing her access to other parts of the organisation. So here's my second reflection. Not everyone will be a successful library social worker. As an emerging profession here in Australia, it's likely that you'll have to look at transferable skills and work with your social worker to settle into a library situation. Set boundaries and make sure everyone is clear about what your library social worker will and won't do, and importantly, be there to support and open doors wherever needed. Number 3, build on your library's ability to harness partnerships. I expect that many, probably most of you here today, work in libraries, and that the point I have included on this slide is a bit of a no-brainer. But what I would hasten to say is that a lot of people working outside of libraries don't think about this enough. From the perspective of someone who's worked in government and the community sector for some years, I will say that when the penny dropped for me on this, it opened up many opportunities that I had not even considered before. This was something that was also clear in the libraries that I visited. Every one of them was doing a lot of work in partnership with a variety of organisations, and some were seeing particularly good outcomes because they broke silos that other parts of government and services were finding really difficult to crack. I know from my experience in Australia that it's pretty similar here. Is this a superpower of libraries? Probably. I think this ability to reach into communities and connect into something that libraries as safe and trusted locations can really contribute. And I reckon it's something every homelessness service needs to know as well. This is Jean, who's the Manager of Health and Human Services at the DC Public Library. The city government created her position about 9 years ago, following a consistent rise in homelessness and a growing number of people with multiple and complex needs assessing the system. Speaking to Jean, I learned that under her direction, the Washington DC library system had adapted constantly and built good relationships with other parts of government. They're linking in with homelessness and mental health services in ways that recognise and capitalise on the important role that libraries can play as front-end community locations. As part of my fellowship, I asked colleagues in many different roles questions about how we can better connect with and involve the people who work for local government who don't have homelessness in their job title or position description. What I've heard is that this kind of connection between front-end operations like libraries and homelessness services in a city might be widely recognised but not always enacted. In many interviews, I've heard wide acknowledgement of the potential in this space, but seen little evidence of programs or formal partnerships in place with front-end services. And I think that library social worker programs are able to change things around, but still more work is often needed to truly link services. At the start, Jean's program in DC was funded through the Department of Behavioural Health, and this created a foundation that connected the library into the larger working system on mental health and homelessness. The library's program was connected into the housing system. They took part in regular matching meetings, and the team was trained and had access to the city's homelessness management database. And this kind of connection was not only evident in DC. I heard about similar arrangements in San Francisco's library, where they saw the library recognised as an equal player in the city's response to homelessness, and it had a significant impact on the library's ability to assist customers experiencing or at risk of homelessness. So this is my third reflection. Strong partnerships and connections have made a huge difference in places like Washington, DC and San Francisco, and has taken those teams' work to the next level. A library social work program may work at one level to help manage individual transactions with customers, but through strong partnerships, the program can also bring about lasting change in communities. And moving to number 4. Don't be afraid to offer drug and alcohol support. This is an interesting one because while I heard that responding to drug and alcohol use in and around facilities was a factor that led to the establishment of social work responses in some libraries, others might have difficulties rolling out programs that meet these community needs, either because of reluctance by management based on the perceived risks in doing so, or concern that initiating responses in this space might increase the number of people coming into libraries to receive assistance. I think these are legitimate concerns, but I'd like to tell you about an incredible library worker I met in Baltimore, who through her work convinced me why libraries should be operating in this space. This is Donna, and she's the peer recovery supervisor at the Pennsylvania Avenue branch of the Enoch Pratt Public Library, same library where Mariel works. The library is located at one of the most notorious junctions in the city. It's the site of the 2015 riots following the death of Freddie Gray in police custody. The peer recovery program was initiated at the library in response to community need after a spate of overdoses and a number of patrons presenting at the library with a variety of needs relating to substance use, homelessness, mental health, and domestic violence. Donna shared openly with me that her son experienced mental health and drug addictions and died close to the library. She can actually see the spot from the window behind her in this picture. She said that this job has helped her heal. She reflected that no one was around to help her son, but there are people here now if anyone needs. She's a really brave woman. She now leads a group of trained peer recovery workers, people with lived experience who are present, approachable and trusted by community and can provide one-on-one assistance at the library. The peer worker program started in the library last year, and it's an extension of work undertaken in a number of public locations in Baltimore, including hospitals and courts. And the team's trained and equipped to respond to a variety of needs, but one standout, as you can see in the photo here, is the focus on drug support, particularly the Narcan on clear display on Donna's table. She was quick to point out to me that the Narcan is out there and ready to use. One of the first questions she asked me when I met her was whether I'd been Narcan trained, and she quickly went ahead and gave me some training. She tells me she used 4 cans on someone recently and then did mouth to mouth, and he survived and came back to see her the next week to say thank you. Many local people know about the Peer Navigator program at this library, and they'll often seek out the team. As I sat at the desk with Donna, people walked in and out asking questions or just dropping by for a chat. It was a pretty amazing experience in that library and something I haven't really seen anywhere before. And so my observation, this professional, clearly defined and open program embedded in the community is providing a much needed support service that helps people and creates extra goodwill with the library. It ticks so many boxes. I know that Donna's story and experience certainly affirms the point I've put up on this slide. Number 5, recognise the value of lived experience workers and know that everyone's different. I'm going to stay on lived experience because we haven't really covered much of that on the agenda today. And I want to finish off with some reflections regarding why peer workers are such superstars in the library space. Here's Leah Esquera and her lived experience workers, her health and safety associates, or HASAs as they call themselves, at the San Francisco Public Library. This is Ida, Sid, and Jen. Some of you might have heard about Leah before. She's an amazing, humble, gorgeous person who has just gone about her business setting up a hugely successful social work program in San Francisco Library. The main library branch sits right at the intersection of the Civic and Tenderloin districts in San Francisco, and it's an area well known for high levels of street homelessness. Leah started up the library social work program about 14 years ago, and one of her first tasks after establishing the program was to hire lived experience workers. The HASAs started off as interns for 6 months to a year, working 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, to allow them the opportunity to manage their own lives as well. The part-time work pattern remains, and Leah is really Leah said it's really important to allow the team to achieve balance and manage other parts of their lives. She commented that even before she knew the word trauma-informed, she was working in that model. Leah worked with San Francisco's Department of Public Health, the library's partner in the startup years, and that initial affiliation lasted about 8 years, and their vocational counsellor helped connect people into the lived experience employment program, and the team had good connections into housing, homelessness, and mental health and other services for clients. The social work program's funded through the San Francisco Library, but until now, Leah and the HASAs had been employed through affiliated government departments and NGOs. But that's going to change when they all become direct employees of the library, which Leah said she's really pleased about. And the good news is that it'll bring higher wages and more stability to the lived experience team as well. That was also something that was happening in DC too, so it was a really great outcome in both libraries. The HASA team's also set to expand from 4 to around 6 or 8 employees, and they will work library opening hours 7 days a week, and they'll fill demand to cover additional branches when more staff are on board. It's interesting because Leah mentioned to me too that the library management had asked her whether they should bring in more social workers, but her actual preference was to bring on more lived experience workers because she felt that they were really doing a lot of the important work there in the libraries. So what I thought I might do is just tell you just to finish off, tell you a few stories that I heard from these wonderful lived experience workers at the San Francisco Library and use some of their words as well, which they allowed me to do. So I'll just finish off with this. This is Jen on the left-hand side. And while at one time she held a good career in IT and the airline industry, long-term trauma turned to addictions, and Jen hadn't held a job for about 8 years. So to get her feet wet again, her vocational manager recommended the library's Health and Safety Associates program. And this is Jen's story in her own words. She said, right away, it was wonderful. I was immediately immersed with Leah, who was very qualified and compassionate. Because it's a lived experience role, it's a lot to take in. It's important having the supervisor, someone who can keep you grounded, keep the guardrails on. Leah gave us so many trainings. I gained insight. I'd never learned about boundaries and self-care. In this job, we walk all of the 6 floors of the library. We look for anyone who might be in distress or in need. The first thing I noticed was that in this job, you're able to sit with someone and talk to them. One person I was talking to was just so tired. We spoke and I thanked him for being so brave. He said, "No one has ever told me I'm strong or brave." I told him, I experienced this too. We all have issues. In the past, I thought it was just me being toxic or dysfunctional. This job helped me realize I had something to offer, and this gave me a lot of hope. Society has a lot of labels. I had a lot of chaos in my own head. I thought I'd never get another job, that someone would hire me. Being able to help someone really did a lot for me. Okay, this is Sid in the middle. Sid came into the library about 5 years ago, around the same time as Jen, and he was introduced by Gina, a street medicine nurse, and the street nurses were a partner with the library. Sid shared his story openly in quick fire. I had a waste away of a mother, no dad. I was on the streets by 12, drunk by 15, heroin addict by 20. I did that for a good 8 or 9 years. I'm not good at years, but I think I had 10 of no cigarettes last March, and I think I've been 18 years sober. Back then, the nurse, Gina, who helped me get the job here, had openings for a methadone program. They looked for me on the streets for 30 days and got me into that program. That saved my life. I went into rehab. Then I got the job here. Some people can't see that the world is not done with them. You can come back, but you have to want it. I wanted a job. I wasn't doing anything sitting in my house reading. I wanted to do something humble and to help someone. There's a certain joy I get out of getting someone to smile, to get a better day. I tell people I'm not a qualified counsellor, but they can just come here to talk or vent or bitch. I can offer that. I can take it. It's no big deal. I know that our houses have become an inspiration for many of our patrons. I see a number of people from the old days and they see me and they're shocked. I think of libraries as the palaces of the cities. They need to be treated that way. The others also mentioned that he was probably one of the biggest readers they'd ever seen. And I think that quote that at the bottom of the slide sort of says it all. And then finally, there's Ida. She's on the right. Ida sits at the far corner of the table as we speak. She's tiny with a black bob and tinted glasses. She actually looks like a librarian. I'd been homeless and on drugs and alcohol most of my life, she says. I can relate. I was very broken. I was lost and homeless, and I looked like this, so no one knew. Homelessness has many faces. You learn that too as you work in the library. I talk to anyone and everyone here. I never knew I could have such outgoing conversations. I was an isolated person before. I think that this job is important to the library. I think our lived experience has such an impact on lives because often there is no one else who is going to connect in this way. You know what it's like to be kicked around and rejected. If someone would just listen to you, you might have a chance. I think we change lives here. I ask, do you need help with anything? Do you need food? That is my opening. And then I'll start engaging with that person and ask about them. Sometimes people don't want services. They like their situation. I'll be there to listen, to give hope. I'll share my testimony. I was like this once. Now I work and I have a home. If you want it, we have the resources. This is what I did, and I know it works. If you follow this, it might work for you. So my observation, I don't think I need to say much more. My observation would be recognise the value of lived experience and know that everyone's different. So that's actually about it for what I wanted to cover today. Here's my recap of observations, and I suppose, can libraries end homelessness? Well, maybe not alone, but I definitely think you are part of a team that can make a difference. As I mentioned, these observations are my own and are a work in progress. So I have a way to go, and I'd love to hear what you think, either here today or outside of the event. And finally, here are a few ways a few resources. I've spoken about what I'll be doing as part of my larger Churchill Fellowship report. That'll be out later. They'll be out early next year. And these are a few resources and ways to get in touch. At the top, there's a blog that I've been writing as I've been traveling, and that includes some of the info that I've sort of covered today. There's also a few articles on the Cities People Love website, including Anna Lockwood's lovely story about San Francisco's library. And I believe she spoke to Jen. Jen sends her love, Anna. And there's my email address too. So I'll stop my slideshow and try and find you all on my screen again.
We're here. Thank you so much, Leanne. You're still sharing, maybe.
Oh, am I? Okay, let me try and change that. Here we go.
Perfect. Now we got you back. Thank you so much for that. I love that story of Sid getting hit by a car because he was reading so much. It's terrific. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. If you have others, people probably just pop them in there and we'll get to them. So Farasat Allah has asked, she's asking how important it is, and maybe you don't know the answer to this, but did you see libraries as you were going around that had actually built homelessness support into their policies? Did you feel that that was like an ad hoc thing, or was it a really important thing that was embedded in their processes and policies?
I might have to go and do this again, Jane. I didn't look at policies. I can go and ask for some extra money so I can go and find out about that, because it's a really good question. I mean, my impression was, in the places that I went to, sort of like our experience, I suppose, here in Australia too, was that it was something that just sort of built up. It was something that sort of raised up as a result of the situation that libraries found themselves in. I mean, I didn't mention it before, but say, for example, in Washington, D.C., what was happening was the people were staying, that this was some years ago, it's not happening right now, but people were sleeping overnight in hostels, and the hostels were closing in the morning, and they were like actually driving buses up to the library and dropping everybody off there in the mornings. And that was the reason why that program actually started there with the social work in the libraries in Washington, D.C. So there probably are policies, but I haven't sort of really looked into that.
And the second half of that question was about training in library schools. Again, you probably don't have evidence for this, but do you think that library schools should include training about homelessness and working with vulnerable communities, I think is the question.
Yeah. We've definitely spoken about it here.
Yeah.
And yes, personally, I think it's really important to sort of start doing some of that cross the cross sort of sector sort of training, because and it did come up a little bit actually in some of the conversations overseas too, that, you know, sort of the same things as here, you know, a lot of there are skill sets, and there's sort of things that are required for librarians and library staff that would really help them be able to do their job, and sort of incorporating some of that social work training into a library, into librarian training, it would be really useful. So I think there was agreement there, but I think maybe some of our speakers this morning might have been better at answering that question, because they would know what's happening in the United States on that front.
Yeah, I know within Charles Sturt, we've started to have conversations about how we can, add that into our library training, and perhaps drawing on the expertise in the social work school to help us do that. It seems like an obvious point of helping each other out, really. But I'm really interested in your experiences of the the peer support workers. Do you know, how did the libraries go about finding them, and how do they make sure that they, like, sort of what is the duty of care of the library to make sure that those peer workers are well and they're housed and that they're not sort of used or not exploited so much? But
so Leah, both in at San Francisco, they had a really close connection with the Department of Social Services, and they were also working with groups that were referring people through. So they were sort of Leah said that all the people working in the peer support program, they wanted them to have some stability to start off with. So people needed to be able to sort of come in and be able to do that work with their sort of life. They weren't sort of sleeping, they weren't rough sleeping, or they had some sort of structure in their lives. And both Jen, I know that all of them actually, Jen, Ida and Sid, all mentioned that they had, sort of had about a year before they went into the program. So they had worked with some of those services. And then when Leah brought them in, they were also doing a lot of training. It was interesting in Baltimore because Baltimore had a really strong training process going on that was also through another level of government, and there was actually an accreditation process that people had to do. So Donna, who was the drug and alcohol peer supervisor, she had done a number of training pieces and then 500 hours of internship, and that was and then she had trained even further to become a peer supervisor. And the people who were coming to work with her were going through that training program and actually then going through doing 500 hours of internship as well. And that training program gave people not only the skills to work in these peer programs, but helped them build skills further on for other jobs as well. And they had a well-established peer program that had peer workers in the libraries, but they also had them in the courts, and they had them in hospitals and in a number of places. And if you have a look at the blog that I sort of sent through, I put some links in that blog to sort of some of those resources. I think it was pretty amazing. And I think that's probably, I feel like in the peer area, we often hear, what I've seen is more sort of, using peer, bringing in peer workers to help inform programs or to help build knowledge amongst communities about the experience of, say, homelessness. But it really took it to another level. It took it to actually a qualification that you would then actually value and sort of use in different ways. So I think there was a lot to learn on that front, actually.
Yeah, it sounds like a great opportunity. And that's not something that I've heard of anywhere in Australia.
No.
Having peer support workers, it just seems like an obvious thing to look at and to develop and to put in place. Another question. Did you find, when you were looking at all these libraries that are doing heaps of work with people experiencing homelessness or other sort of vulnerabilities, did you find that the act of increasing the support for those people made the libraries less attractive to people who weren't from those communities?
Didn't hear that at all, Jane. I feel like every one of those libraries was absolutely buzzing. And, there was a lot going on. There were many different people in the libraries doing many different things. I mean, there were some really great youth programs going on in Baltimore and in San Francisco as well, like with a lot of funding behind them. They were, there were people of all ages. There were in San Francisco when I was there, they were running computer classes and just a whole lot of things going on. So this was just one element of what the libraries offered, and they were massive. They were massive libraries. They were really sort of, there was a lot going on there.
Mm-hmm. There's some research I've done recently where I asked library workers across Australia, had they ever felt concerned that somebody who was experiencing homelessness in their library was making the library less attractive to other people, or was being disturbing to other people in the library. And it was a really high response rate of people saying, yes, we do have that concern.
Oh, really?
So it was hence my question. It was interesting to get your response.
I think also there's something about I did hear a bit about sort of libraries going out there and really talking about what they're doing. So being really clear that that's what they're here to do, and that's what they're, that they welcome everyone, that this is a place for everyone. And I feel like whether it's in libraries or in the homelessness space, the messages that we convey are really important. And I think we all have a role in the same way that I think libraries have a role in sort of getting out there and telling government, you know what, we are a legitimate space to do this work. That was, one of the points that I was trying to make. In addition to that, libraries need to go out to communities and start just talking about it. So, for example, the Baltimore Library are running stories in their newsletters about, sort of all these different pieces. The picture that I put up with Mariel and the gentleman who she helped get a job, that was a story in the paper. They ran stories about Donna Bruce and her peer support workers. There's a lot of info out there. I think there's a bit of PR that everybody needs to do to sort of educate. And that was something that a lot of in the homelessness space people were saying was really important for local government to do as well.
Yeah,
I think we have a role to play.
Yes, absolutely. There's a question from Peter. He says, Leanne, I work in public libraries as an assistant. One of the images you shared concerned a success story of a social worker assisting someone into employment. One of the limits we often experience in direct assistance to members of the public arises from privacy laws, i.e. helping complete online forms, etc. In terms of social workers in libraries, are they restricted by this prevalence, or have you encountered strategies to counter?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I did ask a lot of people about privacy, because I know that from my experience working in homelessness too, that it's often privacy considerations that sort of hold us back on things that we do. It was interesting actually, because some places, it just depended on the locations. Some places were just like not as worried about privacy as others. And what I often heard was, what they said was, what, you've got to think about the end game and the impact for people at the end. And are you going to help somebody? Are you going to keep them, sort of allow them to have a better life? Do they give consent? And therefore, do you go ahead with it, as opposed to sort of not doing it and then like actually not not helping that person to achieve what they want to achieve. And that was whether it was in libraries or whether it was in the homelessness space. There really was, there were really different camps on that, but most of the people I spoke to felt like that they should get over privacy issues and actually just do the work.
Yeah, that sort of ties in with what Patrick was saying this morning about sometimes you just have to be brave, but also don't assume that people need help. If they haven't asked for it, don't impose yourself upon them, but be brave and courageous and do things that, don't let things that are frightening hold you back from giving it a go.
Exactly. My personal opinion is that often privacy just stops us from doing things. I think sometimes privacy might be an excuse for not doing things, but hey, I realize that's not that's not something that's held by everybody. That's just my personal experience and personal thought.
Yeah. One last question. I think with the Baltimore example, do you know where that money was coming from? You said it was really highly funded and it was allowing them to do a whole lot of stuff. Do you know who was funding that? Was like private benefactors, or was it? Yeah.
There's actually a wonderful, as we probably all know, a wonderful sort of tradition of philanthropy in the United States. And it seemed to me like there was a lot of money coming through from private benefactors. For example, the work in the youth space, there was a lot of money coming through, and they were able to do, they had amazing sort of libraries for young people to borrow things like PlayStations and things like that. Sort of they had a lot there.
Yeah,
I don't think it's coming from government.
Yeah, yes, they do that well in the US, I think. All right, well, we need to leave it there with you. Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate you in particular because you must be horribly jet lagged, and it's great to have you home and to learn from your experiences. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thanks, Jane.
And just to close up, we've got a